And first of all, I just want to welcome everyone to the Center for Art in Wood. My name is Nava Milliken. I'm the director of the center, and I'm joined here by my colleague, Director of Outreach and Communications, Katie Sorensen, who will be introducing our guests for tonight. But before we get started, I just ask you to join me in acknowledging that the land that we are situated upon is part of the traditional territory of the Lenape, called the Lenape Hopi. The Lenape lived in harmony with one another on this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed to the west and the north, but also many remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. We acknowledge that the Lenape are the original people of this land, and their continuing relationship with their territory is honored by us. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of the Lenape in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief prominent that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. Thank you. And Katie has put something in the chat about supporting the Lenape in their quest to achieve sovereignty and status in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which does not recognize their tribal authority here. So Katie, would you like to introduce our guests for this evening?
Sure, but first I just want to remind everyone, if you want to use subtitles tonight, if you look on your screen, you'll find a little square with the CC. Go ahead and click on that, and then you'll have subtitles for this evening's program. So I want to welcome everyone to this evening's talk with Kate Hawes, and we have her guest, Brianna. Have multiple computers in front of me, so Hardin, to talk about the Spoon Gram project. I'd like to introduce Kate Hawes, who is a woodworker and emerging craft writer based in the Catskills Mountains of New York. They are a 2020 graduate of the Masters in Critical Craft program at Warren Wilson College. Congratulations. Their research interests include spoon exchanges and carving community, the material agency of wood and craft practices, and the phenomenon of dullness in tool use. They have a certificate in cabinet and furniture making from North Bennet Street School and completed a residency at the Anderson Ranch Vert Center. They have taught woodworking at Peters Valley School of Craft, Makeville Studio, the American Folk Art Museum, and now Defunct Crafts. Crafts Students League, sorry. And then our next guest, which is Brianna Hardin, is a co-founded NYC Spoon Club with Ben Gransos. I said I was gonna screw it up. In 2018 as a community meetup for urban green woodworkers to gather and share knowledge and resources. By trade, Brianna works as an independent graphic designer with a focus on print design, web design, and branding. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kate.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Hawes, and I'm so excited. Thank you, Katie Sorensen and Nava, for inviting me to speak on my spoon carving research that I have just kind of come out of a year's worth of reading and writing and interviewing while I've been in grad school. So I'm going to share my screen and get to my presentation. It should be about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to ask Brianna a few questions about the New York City Spoon Club. All right. Okay, so Okay, great. You all can hear me. Okay. Okay. In 2019, I discovered spoon carving along with the many others in what could be called a global spoon carving craze. My entry was through the New York City Spoon Club, a monthly meetup that anyone who saw the post on Instagram could join with no fees or experience necessary, just a desire to carve a spoon. The group was meeting at a community woodshop in Brooklyn called Makeville Studio, where I was teaching a different kind of woodworking, classes in how to make things like mitered boxes, rectilinear mallets, dovetails, and tables. I was drawn to the boisterous energy in the circle of spoon carvers. The floor was covered with a mat of wood chips, substantial chunks that flew off axes and settled like mulch over the vinyl floor. This was a different kind of messy than what I knew in the furniture shop. Not like the fine dust we generated from sandpaper and saws, dust that became airborne and settled in places you couldn't reach. The spoon carvers seemed to be having more fun. They were swinging their axes, having a great time, jumping in to help each other, and sharing wood from a communal pile on the floor. Wood that was brought in from the streets and parks, species like London plane, serviceberry, calorie pear, or redbud, wood I couldn't wait to open up and see what it looked like, to feel its grain under my knife. This was green wood spoon carving, defined by the fact that it uses wood that is still wet and not that far from the tree. For spoon carving, this means more supple and pliant grain, longer shavings that curl off a knife, and the possibility of sourcing wood pretty much anywhere where there are trees. I find it a more sensual experience to carve green wood. Beads of moisture sweat from its pores, and the aromatic compounds in wood can be intoxicating. Wintergreen, lilac, straw, apple. There is a simplicity to green wood spoon carving. It's portable and can be done in kitchens, living rooms, on park benches, and I have heard on subway platforms. Its tool set is relatively small: a carving axe, a straight knife, and a hook knife for getting inside the spoon bowl. Spoon carvers work in the space near their body, axing and knifing down onto stumps. They have no need for tools that make straight edges. Spoon carvers live in the realm of curves, finding a spoon in a split chunk of wood rather than putting parts together, joining or assembling. I began interviewing some of the spoon carvers from the New York City Spoon Club in March 2020, just as the lockdown was starting. The club had put its meetings on pause, so people were more alone in their carving, adjusting to the new normal of Zoom. Conducting interviews on Zoom while in remote learning graduate school felt like an opportunity to connect, to create meaning online when other ways of being, work, and having conversation had been shut down. My project highlights the voices of spoon carvers who exist as their own diffuse subculture. I am aware of the biases towards big names in studio craft, writing and shows about museum-worthy objects, and the lineages of craftspeople who flow out of well-known craft schools and university programs. Spoon carving, by contrast, is a populist craft phenomenon of backyards, ad hoc meetings, and meetups. I wanted to know more about how a small twiggy form like a spoon can play such a big role in this popular craft. Many spoon carvers told me they carved because it was soothing or meditative, calming their anxiety, giving their hands something to do to redirect their focus. One carver, Joe, said he was in it for the crafting rather than the craft. I became curious about the exchange of spoons, not on Etsy pages or in Instagram generated sales or in craft fairs, but the way they circulate in swaps, trades, and gifts between carvers. I went to a gathering in Arkport, New York called the 6th Irregular Spoon Gathering, where there was a large central table where spoon carvers put out their spoons. There were neat rows patchworked against each other, ceramic jugs overflowing with spoons, and shallow cardboard boxes full of spoons. Some had cards or written notes with willing to trade or a price. Spoon carvers, I learned, collect each other's spoons, take them home, take them home and keep them for studying, feeling their curves, seeing how thin a bowl can get, how they don't like a handle, and using them, testing them out in the drama of cooking and eating. A spoon carver told me about a friend who has 3 5-gallon buckets filled with spoons from carvers around the world. He has them tagged so that he can keep track of who made them, where and when he got them. In my interviews with carvers, most said, "Hold on while I go get you a spoon," coming back with a spoon that was important to them, that could illustrate some point they were making, like the decoration on a handle, 2 chip carved stick figures like the one on the left, or the deep crank that could be achieved with the right bend in a branch. Spoon carvers showed me their walls of spoon racks, where spoons hung in orderly lines, strapped in or in between pegs or straps. Rise Up and Carve, or RUAC as it's known, is an open access Zoom channel for spoon carvers started in February 2019 by a spoon carver named Chuck Trella. He wanted to create a space where he could carve every day before work. That might be like sitting around stumps, carving at the in-person gatherings he'd been to. Many of the carvers there are isolated geographically, and here they can drop in and out in any time zone for some carving company and a conversation about wood taxonomy in Australia or the gender imbalance in the spoon carving world, to show a spoon in progress, or maybe to swap a spoon. Suze is a spoon carver in Zurich, Switzerland, who found community and carving help during the pandemic on RUAC. She carves in the digital carving room nearly every day during her lunch break. Suze has over 70 spoons from 17 countries that she has received from swaps. I'm going to play an excerpt from my interview with Suze.
And sometimes it's like when you had a lot of interaction with the person, and there's always, at some point, you get to that moment where you say, okay, now it's time that we do a spoon swap. It's like, yeah, it's a bonding moment somehow. And then it comes very naturally, you know. It's one of the 2 people will bring it up somehow, or even joke about it, or say it's high time we swapped or something, and then it's just happening naturally. And I like those the best, because if I know a person a bit better, I can make like a personal spoon. I can incorporate something that person likes, like bees or colors or whatever. I can make it special.
Instagram posts with the hashtag spoon swap show a profusion of spoons posed next to handwritten letters, cards, and open packages that have traveled outwards from their makers' hands into what could be called a global spoon carving economy. Many carvers put extras in their spoon packages, things like Nabisco Easy Cheese, Doritos, local coffee, Canadian maple syrup, a honey dipper, and hard to find national delicacies, often sweets. Objects like spoons come alive as they move in a social world. As a craftsperson, I'm preoccupied with questions about where the things I make go, where they end up, and how they will be valued. I want the things I make to move around in the world and be folded into people's lives. Spoon swapping is a lively form of giving and receiving that creates intimacies amongst the carvers who make them. I have noticed that spoon carvers, when sitting around carving together, will stop and put the spoon they are working on in their mouth. The person goes through the motions of eating, bringing the bowl of the spoon, which is in some yet done state of being carved, into their open mouth. They may move the fleshy insides of their mouth around the wood, feeling it from all sides with whatever sensory equipment there is at the ready. It is not savoring, but discerning, The bowl is still being formed, and so there is a lot to think through as it sits there, a mute wood shape surrounded by sensing flesh. The spoon carver may be thinking, a little off here, too thick there, smooth out that bump. And then getting the answer, the spoon carver pops it out of their mouth and gets on with the subtractive process of carving. This task of making an object that feels good in the mouth is a peculiar one. What does it mean to make an object to fit the mouth? The mouth is a negative space, an orifice that is not easily pictured. It is a strange space, flanked with orderly white blocks made of a shiny rock-hard material. Out of its center comes a shape-shifting red form. The rounded underneath of a spoon bowl must be thin enough so it enters and exits the mouth without too much ado. The intimacy that comes with spoons can be a reason why some spoon carvers do not freely let their spoons go out into the world. Gary is a carver who makes spoons for people in his inner circle of friends and family. He thinks about what he admires in the person, maybe their strength or maybe their particular beauty, when he makes them a spoon. To give a spoon is to share something with that person. It's about a bond, a closeness.
So I like making gifts for people. Yeah, a lot of cooking spoons, a lot of ladles, flippers, eating spoons. I feel like they're a little bit more on the intimate side, and I'm not always comfortable making that. If I'm making somebody an eating spoon, then I test it, you know. So I feel like there has to be that level of connection before I even start doing that, because I just can't do that. That's a little too close.
A spoon is not a fork, and I have never seen a wood fork traded so promiscuously as the spoons I see swapped with abandon. This might be because spoon's unending curves and roundness has more to say about love and sharing than does the sharpness of things with tines. A spoon's bowl is an open orb that asks to be filled, to carry something nourishing to its user. And this is a clip from my interview with Jody, a spoon carver in upstate New York.
I really only trade with people who I know or have a connection with. So when I use a spoon that somebody else made for me, it's like they're with me having a meal. And if something happened to one of them, I would be like, oh no, like Halen got put in the dishwasher. Don't do that. Like, oh no. You have a connection to it that is also a connection to that person.
There is a porousness to wood that makes the hand-carved spoon an especially intimate thing. Unlike a metal spoon that resists the intake of fluids, that never carries with it the stain of a salad or the sodden soak of soup, a wood spoon is happy to exist without separation from the world. I've wondered if it is this material quality of leakiness or openness that makes wood spoons so lovable. The way that wood is in an ongoing exchange with what's around it, inhaling and exhaling moisture, making itself at home in whatever medium it enters, whether a mouth or a pot. A hand-carved wood spoon has no stake in permanence. Wood spoons grow fuzzy and gray with use. Grain that was once burnished with the cut of a sharp knife becomes raised like fabric. Surfaces erode with washings, becoming softened and blurred. Unlike a sculpture or object in a vitrine or pedestal, a spoon is meant to move about, to be in the weather of daily life. A well-known craft critic told me, well, the spoon itself is insignificant. As a spoon carver myself, I feel otherwise. The spoon's form is a lyrical meeting of curves that entrances me, each spoon leading to the next. My project is not to catalog the aesthetic types of spoons, but to understand something about the people who make them, to find out what hooks them on spoon carving, and what it is about spoons that make them the center of a popular craft movement. It was precisely the significance of spoons, how much they matter to the carvers who make them, that interested me. The spoon at the heart of all this carving activity asks to be shared, and shared well, with meaning and with attention. Thanks for listening. This has been great. So I'm hoping we can have, I'm gonna talk with Brianna about the New York Spoons Club, and then, you know, think about your questions, because I really want this to be like a conversation. So I look forward to hearing from you all after we talk. I'm just gonna ask Brianna, just like jump in and ask Brianna the first question, which is about the inception of the New York City Spoon Club. I have an interview with Brianna, and I asked you about this, and you said that you were flying blind before attending an in-person gathering called the Greenwood Fest. You were teaching yourself to carve from a book, you bought a $20 Mora knife, and you were foraging city parks for what you called, and I love this, punky small bits of nothing, odds and ends of wood. But something was missing for you. And so going to this festival was a turning point. And you started New York City Spoon Club in the wake of this festival. So I'm wondering on a personal level about this shift from the approach before and after.
Yeah, I mean, I was carving kind of intermittently for about a year before I attended this regional festival. And simply put, it's just so hard to learn a three-dimensional craft from looking at flat photographs and even video tutorials, which were helpful. They don't allow tactility. So the first time that I was able to hold a spoon created by an experienced maker, this light bulb totally switched on in my head. I could close my eyes and learn more about the form from my sense of touch than from any amount of video watching. And also there was this kind of amazing thing at Greenwood Fest, which I think is common amongst these gatherings, where there's this kind of collective creative energy. And so at this gathering and at these gatherings in general, there's kind of typically this central area in the event space where there's a big pile of wood, like in log form. And there are chopping blocks arranged around it. And the idea is that people can just grab some wood, take out their tools and work at their leisure, either in between classes or in lieu of even taking any formal classes at all, if it's just kind of a more informal gathering. And it becomes this kind of incredible town square environment, like where impromptu demonstrations and sharing and people just kind of gather and work, sometimes even in silence side by side. And that was such an incredible thing. I mean, living in New York City, there are not that many opportunities for like a non-commercialized encounter like that. And I had this desire to take that kind of spontaneous sense of community back home with me. So in one of the classes I took at Greenwood Fest, I connected with another craftsperson, Ben Gangsos, who I see here in attendance tonight. Hi, Ben. Please interrupt me if I tell the narrative wrong. He happened to live in Brooklyn as well. And so coaxed by the instructor, we talked about trying to gather locals together. And Ben suggested that he could host in his backyard. And so I made a logo, we set up an Instagram account, set out a newsletter, and spread the word amongst people we knew. And people started showing up to his home. We hosted these sessions once per month. And within a couple months, we were basically filling his backyard with like a dozen, 15 people. Some of them we knew through the festival and otherwise, and some were just total strangers who happened to find this on Instagram or through word of mouth. And so that's at the point where we decided to, no longer burden Ben with his home hosting, and we reached out to local venues, and the owner of Makeville was kind enough to accommodate our monthly meetings. And then that's how I met Kate.
Yeah, it's a great I love this, the origin story, and you can look on the New York City Spoons Club's Instagram and see photographs like from that earlier time, which is fun. So yeah, and then this question that I have here is, so at this festival, it was Barn the Spoon, who is a spoon carver. If you don't know of him, he's a spoon carver and an author. He's written a book, at least one book. And he runs this UK spoon group called Spoon Club. I've never joined, so I can't speak to it. But Barn the Spoon told you at the festival, Brianna, that you and Ben should start the Spoon Club. And he said, you said that he said it was a social activity, which is like kind of the heart and soul of spoon carving, that it is this social activity. And I was thinking about, let me see, I was thinking that, you know, people, one of the things I've noticed is that people learn from each other. It's not just like about like laughing and having a good time, but like people are actually learning how to carve from each other in these groups. I talked to a woman who had attended the New York City Spoon Club, Lauren, and she said that at her very first meeting, she sat next to a guy at Spoon Club who she said was grumpy and quiet, but ended up lending her his knife. And it turns out her knife was completely wrong for spoon carving. And he showed her how to ride the bevel to get nice cuts, and told her like where to buy it and all that. So, I mean, she had a really big impact on her building her skills, you know, like she really like remembers this guy, and she's like, he disappeared into the night. I never saw him again. But yeah, you must see this all the time, Brianna, at meetings, like people learning from each other.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. It's totally thrilling. I really prefer to try to be invisible as a host as much as I can, or at least to connect newcomers to other members who might have something to share that would possibly interest them. And I really love seeing folks come in with all levels of experience with woodworking, whether they do it professionally, if they have experience with conventional woodworking, and just see what they bring to the gathering. And so, for example, like one of our regular members studied the indigenous craft of the region he used to live in the Pacific Northwest, and he incorporates that into his work. He has a tool that's particular from that tradition of woodworking, and he carves bowls with that aesthetic in mind. There's another member who has an interest in medieval history, and he uses that to inspire his design. Gary, who you featured, he has background in concrete work and kind of industrial design. And so that's kind of the sensibility that he brings. So it's amazing. I love that there's no one source for style and guidance. At least I refuse to acknowledge that there is, even if someone says so. And so everyone has something interesting to bring to the craft based on their own interests, I believe.
Yeah, and it's great. And like, as I think you said, like it's like very few places you can go, especially in New York City, where you don't have to pay a lot of money to like either have a really good time or learn something, you know?
Yeah.
So it's very unique in that way. Because my research like happened in 2020 during the pandemic, I was very curious from your perspective as the co-founder and you know, you've been running the New York City Spoon Club, like how, you know, that transition was of the pandemic. Like you had such high attendance before it. I mean, I remember there'd be like 20 people or something in a small space. How did people stay connected during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, it took me back to the time before I attended Greenwood Fest, and I remember this importance of the importance of in-person gathering for this craft. And I personally found that I wasn't so self-motivated to carve as much, because I realized how much of my own carving was connected to just being with other people and having this monthly gathering to look forward to. It was really bittersweet. And so bringing so Rise Up and Carve was kind enough to host us and allow us to kind of co-opt their meetings monthly for New York City Spoon Club to join. And I was happy for that, but it was really bittersweet. I was personally comforted by seeing familiar faces and having these conversations, but it literally flattened the experience. Like I couldn't move around a room to talk with different people one-on-one I couldn't hold other people's work in my hands while I listened to them talk about it. I mean, one of the things that's so incredible is like someone will come up to me at a meeting and say, what do you think about this? And they will hand me the object. And while I'm, just running my hands over it, I'll have this whole sensory experience and hear them share what their experience was while they were carving it. And that was gone. And so to be honest, for me personally, the Zoom meetings weren't so successful. I think I got Zoom fatigue pretty quickly. and I personally wound up disengaging from it until we were able to resume meeting in person. So, I have so much respect for the Rise Up and Carve group, but I think it works really well for some folks, but I may be spoiled with the privilege of, a monthly community to meet with. And I think that really is so important to me.
And then this question is about like access to spoon carving, because I've heard a lot of people say that this is an accessible way I could enter woodwork, as beginners, that they could enter the field, get their hands on some wood and start making stuff out of wood. And so like one interviewee said it was apartment-sized woodworking. And then another one said, yeah, it was like a kind of woodworking I could do where I didn't have to do any math. And which is, I think, pretty true, actually. I don't think you need math. And then, like some carvers just like carve on their lunch break. So like there is this way that it can kind of fit into your life, pretty easily, that I think is interesting and pretty cool. And also like other people have said that the tools are pretty easy to find, that I've heard one person say they're democratic tools. And I think this is probably a bit of a controversial issue. What's your experience with like, is it accessible? Can people just like come on by and start spoon carving, or is it not that easy?
Yeah, I mean, I think access is hugely important. And personally, I've been drawn to handcraft of all kinds, but I've always felt that woodworking was something that I was blocked from exploring because I live in an apartment. And so the comment about like, this is apartment sized is very relatable. And it, if a person doesn't have, as I didn't at the time that I started the club, doesn't have the expendable income to take often expensive woodworking classes, I think there's this feeling I had of like, I'd love to do this and reconnect with what I learned when I was a kid and in school, but I'd be able to take this class once and then just, probably never do this again because I couldn't afford to have shop access. And so yeah, I mean, the barrier to entry, literally anyone can pick this up. And for somebody walking into our club with some basic knife skills, the barrier to entry is that $25 Mora knife. And then the club, what we do to facilitate folks who have basic knife skills and, know how to safely handle a knife, that don't maybe know about using axes or the hook knives used to carve the bowl of the spoon. We keep what we call blanks in stock, which are basically, we buy these pieces of wood from other makers that are kind of like either cut down with a bandsaw, they're chunks of wood that are cut down with a bandsaw or axed with an axe to form like a very rough outline of a spoon. And so all of the axe work is done, or sometimes bandsaw work, just to make it an efficient process for the maker. And I can hand these to a new carver, and all they have to do is use a knife using basic knife cuts. And so that's this idea of like, if somebody just knows basic knife safety, they can walk in and still participate and then see if they enjoy this enough to pursue the activity further.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I think like sometimes there's like, it's like the axe, like I had never used an axe before I came to the Spoon Club, which is like, I've been an urban, a woodworker in New York City my whole life. And I never had a reason to use an axe. I mean, I'm not a lumberjack, like, so I was a little like, when I think I borrowed Ben's, he lent me his, and I was like, it's this heavy thing that looks like it could like chop an animal's head off. Like it's kind of crazy when you're holding it, you feel like this sort of power, and then you're like, do I want this power? No, but it's a loaded tool, I'll say, culturally. And I always like I always remember the first image of an axe I saw was the lesbian Labrys, which is like a two-headed like axe that like symbolizes like lesbian pride or something. Anyway, so anyway, the axe is not always something people feel comfortable with. So I'm glad that you have the like sort of already, yeah, like started blanks.
Yeah, axe work is something so different for most Americans, I'll say, and then especially for women who, you know, perhaps never held one before or used one before, as certainly was the case for me. You know, perhaps like boys might learn how to chop firewood in camp or something like that, or in scouts, but women are definitely, you know, unless you grow up in kind of a rural area, like if you grew up in a city like I did, I had no reason to do that. And in fact, the first axe that I purchased for myself was like a very lightweight camping hatchet. And I took it to Greenwood Fest, and I was quickly told, and I bought it because I was like, oh, well, I'm a woman. I can't hold this kind of heavier object. Surely this is right for me. And somebody kindly and politely explained to me, like, no, you need to be using the real thing that the men are using, because if you're using it properly, the weight of the axe head is what's doing all the work. You're letting gravity bring it down, as opposed to you using your muscles to use it. And certainly I got sore using a properly sized axe, but that kind of, I mean, back to the democracy of tools, that was such a light bulb moment of like, oh yeah, you know, I can use the same thing the boys do, and I can become strong enough to use it and learn how to use it. And there's no barriers. There's no reason why that shouldn't be so. But yeah, so that said, we do struggle with some aspect of this. So like I was just talking about, you know, if somebody knows basic, you know, knife safety, they can come in and basically kind of pick things up easily. But we're a community gathering space, and we're not set up to teach. We're volunteer run. I'm leading things as Ben left us for Maine at the beginning of the pandemic, and so no longer attends our regular meetups. But I'm supported by a few kind of veteran club members who, you know, help share hosting duties. But anyway, we all have full-time jobs. None of us are exactly professional woodworkers, and so we don't teach formally. And we want to also preserve this as a social gathering. So no one member is expected to automatically tutor newcomers, of which there are many and often. And so, sometimes we have in the past struggled with folks wanting to be taught. They come in and see, you know, me using an axe, and they're like, oh man, can I try that? And that's a no, because, you know, we're not equipped to kind of share all that knowledge immediately. And so we do ask for people to look to learn the basics on their own or elsewhere. And we do host occasional demonstrations, or we connect folks who do instruction on a small or individual basis. And we try our best to point people to the increasing number of resources, whether that's in social media, books, videos, like you mentioned. Bar in the Spoon Club is effectively a video subscription service where he has all these videos that teach people, and then tell them to keep coming back. Come back as you're interested, and then once you get comfortable with this on your own, you know, show up here and we'll continue to guide you. So that's definitely a process that we evolved into. And I wish there was an easier way to just be like, yeah, totally, there's a class, you know, that runs monthly or something. I dream of a world like that, maybe eventually.
So then here's another, I think this is going to be my last question. Ben told me that he very consciously steered away in the New York City Spoon Club's marketing and literature from Sloidy language in the club's name, because a lot of these spoon clubs will have like Sloyd in there some way, which I don't, if you don't know what Sloyd is, it's refers to the Swedish manual arts training programs. Like kids go through this like when they're young in school, making things. It's not just woodworking, it's also like weaving and other things too. But anyway, Sloyd, Ben told me that he stayed away from Sloyd because he didn't want a bunch of bros with beards and axes coming to, and I'm interested in this thing. I mean, this like, so Sloyd can have this like cis male sort of white guy connotation, and Ben wanted everyone to feel comfortable, especially non-cisgendered males, queers, and BIPOC people. In fact, he told me that the bro-y people showed up and never came back. I'm bringing this up because this is definitely, I don't know that it's an issue at the New York City Spoon Club, but I think it is an issue in other social settings for spoon carvers, that there is a sort of type of like, sort of energy, I would say, from like what we're calling bro-y. And I have always appreciated that you guys were not encouraging that. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad that's something that Ben and I discussed early on. And, you know, I think that the use of language can be maybe helpful in signaling to some people, but I think, you know, I certainly don't want to exclude the beardy folks, but
Yeah.
I also don't want anyone to be like, I don't know what that word is, so this is not for me. And I'm going to be like really reductive here and say that there are two types of people who show up to our meetings. There are people who come with a curious and open mind, and there occasionally, and far less often, I'm happy to say, there are some people who walk in and they make it clear that they believe that they have something to show me or teach everyone else, regardless of their level of familiarity with the craft. And the great news is the latter type doesn't last long. I agree with Ben. They don't come back. There's simply nothing for them to sink their teeth into, and I love that. There's just no traction for bravado, and someone who's doing this for a few months can make something as unique and beautiful as somebody who's been doing it for a decade. Like there's no rubric, there's no rules, and no goalposts. And you know, some folks who are connected to a tradition of crafts, you know, like the Scandinavian woodcraft, might disagree with me, but there are all kinds of cultures that have, you know, a woodcraft lineage, and we're here in 2022 making art with wood, and we're all thrilled to be doing something that takes us away from our screens and from our work lives and into a space of sharing and craft and interpersonal attunement. And I just feel really grateful for that energy that we're able to maintain.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Brianna. Thank you, Ben, who's here. And I feel like spoon carvers have really sort of kept me going, and I can't wait to get back to the Spoon Club, actually. But yeah,
come back.
Yeah, I want to come back.
So we have some questions in the chat. Nava is asking, I'm intrigued by the concept of gathering and carving in the form of these small but active groups. In your research, Kate, were you able to learn of other historical and cultural precedents for this tradition?
Not for like, well, do you mean for the social groups, like the gatherings and the meetups and stuff? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I found the one sort of reference I did find is so there's this Swedish carver who came to the United States late 70s, early 80s, named Willy Sundquist. And he was a spoon carver, and he was actually a consultant for like the Swedish, a craft consultant for the Swedish government. So he was like very skilled, had grown up doing Sloyd crafts. But yeah, he wrote this book and called Swedish Carving Techniques that was published in 1990 by Taunton Press, which we know from woodworking books. But in the book, he says, it always struck me, he said in the introduction, yeah, it's like, it's an amazing book. Like he takes you through all the techniques. Like you can literally look at I always tell people to look at it because I learned so much from it. Like you look at the pictures and you can like kind of like copy what he's doing with his hands. But he's really clear in the introduction, and he says, even though you're reading this book, I encourage you to work in study circles. He calls them study circles, and to work with others, because that's how you learn, because everyone comes bringing their own interpretation of these knife grips, their own, like Brianna was saying, their own aesthetic, you know, impulses or creative, you know, traditions into it. And so he's like, I really encourage you to just, you know, it's almost like, I'm not sure he really wanted to write the book. It's almost like, he's like, just go out there and like be with people carving spoons, and like, you know, you learn from each other, like, but the book's amazing. So the answer to your question, Nava, is like, I didn't really find any like historical, like great historical stuff. I think the Sloyd tradition is like where it would be, but that's very like specific to Sweden. And in this country, the first classes, as I've been able to figure out, were at country workshops, which is in North Carolina. And this got started by Drew and Louise Langsner, but they were paid workshops, and those were like in the 80s with Willy Sundquist as their teacher, and then his son Yoge Sundquist. So they were paid workshops, so that's a little different.
Thank you for responding to that. I think I'm intrigued because of the universality of wood, and of course the thousands and thousands of years of human engagement with it from all over the planet, wherever human civilizations existed. It seems it's interesting to me to know if there are other documented traditions like this that were comprised of people coming together for, whether for leisure or a form of fellowship, and spending time carving together. But thank you for filling in some of the blanks about the North American and Swedish tradition.
So in the chat, Nishay wrote, this reminds me of knitting groups that they've been a part of, and also quilting groups. And Clarity agrees with that. That's what they were thinking. Ronnie wrote, I carved my first handful of spoons from the scrap pile of my friend's shop, kiln dried maple. Really hard to carve. Yes, it is. What do I look for when picking out a nice piece of wood from the nature? I'm a serious rookie and still learning all the things. Ronnie, we're all learning all the things still, including sharpening. What are some things you found helpful when you first started out?
Make friends with a tree pruner who can get you some fruit wood. I mean, that's what we did at the club, so we didn't have to keep carving stuff we illegally foraged from the parks. I mean, Kate can speak to this, but basically fruit wood is fantastic. Birch is really kind of the classic, like, you know, white black birch has fantastic properties of being soft and easy to carve when it's green, and hardening up quite well when it dries. But besides that, we covet cherry and walnut, apple if we can find it, and yeah, Kate.
Yeah, I'm trying to think where, yeah, I mean, the New York City Spoon Club was great because everyone would bring wood in a pile. So in the city, yeah, you just want to find, like, I mean, I think like a lot of us, most spoon carvers I talk to are like, they would never cut a branch. Yeah. We're all pretty like soft-hearted that way. But there's often like, you know, I would find like the parks department in the park near where I lived in Brooklyn would have like piles of tree cuttings. And if you go like at dark or something, you can like take a little saw, and you really just need like a little, you know, like 8-inch or whatever, it depends on how big you want your spoon, but you know, section of it. And I mean, if you're looking for that, you want something at least 2 to 3 inches, like, you know, that you could imagine like the width of a spoon bowl fitting in, and hopefully not like serious cracks in it already forming. If there are, you can cut off like 3 inches and like go further down the branch, and get something further along that's not so cracked, but you'll also be splitting it in half. So if the crack is like right through the middle, you could probably still use it. And like I sort of steer away from when the end grain has like a lot of mold on it, because then I think, oh, I don't know if I want to like inhale microorganisms. I don't know. Sometimes I just steer away from that. But yeah. There's also people who sell spoon blanks, and I can't speak to this because I've never ordered any, but that's a possibility. You can buy spoon blanks.
Thanks for answering my question.
I'll drop a link in the chat to a service that will ship you blanks and who we order from.
Thanks.
Cool.
Okay. I have to get back up to my list. I've been following the chat down below. Let's see. Sorry, it's a little noisy here. Is in the Bay Area, and that's how their spoon club began too. And they say it really unlocked my abilities once I found others who carved locally. So we know that community can really be an asset, not just in, you know, sharing skill knowledge, but life knowledge, right?
Yeah. Hi, Ian. If any of you all are in the Bay Area, you should get in touch with the Bay Area Spoon Club. I've never been able to make it there, but I get your emails all the time, and, you know, would love to meet up with you all at some point.
Namita wrote in the chat, how are people finding spoon carving groups? And that's what we were just talking about. How did you find the Bay Area one? Ian, if you want to maybe speak to that, how you came across.
Yeah, and you know, before Ian jumps on, I'll just say Instagram is the way that we found people when we were starting the Spoon Club. We just hashtagged the heck out of it. And Ben can maybe speak more to that, but we just connected with people on Instagram, and I think that Barn the Spoon has a directory. So I'll stop talking and see if I can pull up that link to see if he has any stateside recommendations.
And hey, everybody, I can speak to the Bay Area experience. Google, I think I Googled for about a year before I really found anybody with some sort of, shaving trail back toward a passion as big as mine around carving. So I eventually found some folks, but Instagram definitely seems to be, I can't speak to any kind of community that's on Facebook, but Instagram really has everything. And just about everything I do and all the connections I do are all around Instagram. So definitely do some searching there for any local clubs wherever you are.
Thank you, Ian. Ronnie asks about, speaking of comfort, what do lefties do? Is that not a thing in carving?
That's absolutely a thing. There are tools made for folks who are left-handed. Axes can either be ground with a center grind, meaning they're symmetrical on both sides, or have a bevel that's steeper on the right or the left, and depending on which your dominant hand is, you would select one or the other. And then straight knives are obviously ambidextrous, but a curved knife, they also make those in left and right-handed versions. And so, yeah, no one's excluded.
May I ask, is there like a name, or is the bevel on a certain side for lefties versus righties? Here, I'm a person. This is what I look like. Hi, everybody. Thanks for doing this, by the way. This is really rad. Yeah, so yeah, I was actually just messaging Ben privately too. But yeah, I really struggle with the hook knife because I'm a lefty. So, but I'm actually looking at that website you just sent me, the Spoon Crank. and I'm Googling it too. But there's like not a lot of options unless I want to shop at Amazon, but F those guys.
So Ben's your tool guy. If you want tool recommendations,
Okay, cool. I'll
definitely
keep. All right, Ben,
get a
get
hold of
ready.
Ben.
I'm
And
about
I,
to. I'm about to fire it up.
Feel free to email me, and I answer the NYC Spoon Club Gmail account, and I could, and then on our website as well, I think we have maybe a little outdated, but we have some tool maker listings, so you can check that out as well. If you go to the nycspoonclub.com website and then scroll down a bit, we have some links to tool makers where you can find, anything you could possibly imagine to spend your money on, and I'll drop that into the chat too. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cool,
please do reach out directly, and we'll connect you.
Rad. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Namita asks, what about books or teaching connected to spoons in places like Japan, Korea, and China for tea, for example?
Kate, I'll let you take this one. I don't know of anything off the top of my head, but that this is not in my field of research, unfortunately. But
I really can't speak to that. I think my research focused on the New York City Spoon Club right here. But yes, I would love to find some information and some books and even pictures about wood spoons in those countries for sure.
I'll jump in. Actually, I remembered in my past life as a book cover designer, I worked on the cover for this book, which I hope it's not backwards. It probably is, but it's called Water, Wood, and Wild Things by Hannah Kirschner. And it's an American woman who became fascinated with Japanese food culture and craft. And she basically traveled to this small town and learned many things. Like she studied sake making, she studied rice making, among other things. And she studied with this master woodworker, wood turner. And he turns with a power lathe, not a pole lathe, but she kind of goes into, in learning from this master wood turner, goes into Japanese craft in that capacity. So I'll link to that in the chat. I think it's just a fascinating read if you're interested in craft and Asian cultures.
Namita
and also
says
wood turning.
that
it sounds like.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm just looking in the chat here, and Namita says that they didn't mean to put you all on the spot. Curious about non-European connections too. So, Brianna, can you post the name of the book in the chat?
Linked. Yeah. Apologies. I'm far from a historian, and so I'm a bit underinformed there. And what's the name? There's a green woodworker whose name is escaping me. Ben, maybe you can help me out. But he travels to Japan to study with woodworkers there as well. And he's really prominent, and I'm terrible with names. But thank you, Wade. I appreciate that. Jared Dahl. If you look up Jared Dahl, the name spelling is in the chat from Wade Hutchinson. Look on his Instagram, and you'll see amazing photos. He's a wonderful person. I think even if you just reach out to him, he can certainly, I would imagine he can guide you on that.
I think a lot of the problem is it's like we know that people carve spoons kind of everywhere and have been for a long time, but what is written and what is put down and recorded and documented is often not, found. It's not found if it's not. And so that can be frustrating when doing research.
Which is why it's so great that you've dedicated your research to this field.
Yeah, exactly. Because even in this country, it's not something that you really read about unless you're in it,
So Ian says in the chat, arborists seem to be the most compassionate for the cause of greenwood working. for me, it's free, so it can be free or cheap. Even urban parks have a spot where they dump green waste. If you're comfortable with that, bring a small saw in your bag and take some of it, whatever fits your needs. And actually, speaking of that, we had a rain and wind last night, and I walked through the parks here in Philadelphia with a bag, picking up fallen branches. So it's an easy way to grab some nice wood. I found some beautiful holly, so to work with. Kate, you were
Also
gonna...
adding that, one short thing, and before Kate just, excuse me, one just a second. I put in the chat, if you're located in Philly, you can head over to the Fairmount Department of Parks and Rec, and they actually have an area where they bring all of the fallen wood or cut wood, and it's available for the public. They're changing the model of accessibility constantly, so it's good to check the website to see what the parameters are. But I really second that look to the city parks first and foremost for local and native species, and you should be able to get some good material there. We have a really long relationship, the Center for Art and Wood, with the Fairmount Parks and Rec Department, and they've supplied a lot of artists coming to town or located in Philly with materials for work.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Nava. Well, I think we're pretty much at the end, and I just want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you, Brianna, for sharing us about, being a founder of the New York City Spoon Club. And Kate, wow. What an amazing project that you have completed. And I know that it's just the beginning. You're going to keep going forward with this and finding so many amazing connections that people develop through this craft of carving.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me. It's really great to be here and to be in a wood appreciating audience.
We can always supply that for you.
That's an understatement, right?
It might be in our name. Thank you so much, Kate. I'm so excited. And I'm also really excited that some programming at the Center for Art and Wood running currently allowed or opened a door for this conversation to take place with us. And that is the exhibition Spoons to Clear the Soul, the world of Norm Sartorius, who has committed some 30 plus years of his life pushing the possibilities of the spoon form and its essential ingredients of handle plus vessel. That exhibition is running until the end of July. I believe the last day is July 24th. We'll certainly have more programming coming up, including, this is almost like the conceptual warm up to our spoon carving or free range carving event on Saturday. We're going to be gathering in front of the Center for Art and Wood and showing Philly the kinds of spoons we can carve when we get together as a group. So we'll be putting it all into practice, Kate.
Yeah, I can't wait to see pictures.
It's going to be fun. Well, thank you,
Everyone's
everyone.
invited. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Brianna. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brianna. Good to see you.
Yes,
See you,
too, Kate. Thank
Ben.
you. Bye.
Bye.